gung-ho guy that he is, decides, let's go on another missionary journey. It's going to be awesome, just like the first one. And Barnabas is like, cool. This is his heartbeat. He loves to preach the gospel. He is the encourager of the churches. And he says, hey, let's bring along my cousin, Mark. Now, Mark had, on their first journey, he had betrayed Paul and Barnabas, and he had quit on the ministry. So Paul wanted nothing to do with this. He said, no way. You guys go your own way. I'm going to find someone else. And so Barnabas, at this point, is faced with a difficult decision: to go along with his good friend Paul, or to stay behind and minister to this, to preserve the dignity of this fallen minister. And so Barnabas opts for the second of the two options. And he stays, and he encourages and builds up his cousin and his friend. Even though Barnabas is battered and has gone through a lot of ministerial arguments, he decides, I'm going to continue loving those that I care for. And so we see Barnabas' character. And that is how the story of Barnabas and Paul ends in Acts. It ends with Barnabas retreating back to his hometown to take care of this one that he loves, to persevere in love for this fallen minister, and to persevere for the sake of the gospel and the churches. But if we continue reading, that's not the whole story of Barnabas and Paul. We never hear if Barnabas and Paul make up and are friends again, but we do know that Paul and Mark end up becoming reconciled. So there's good reason to believe it. But if we look at the theology and the letters of Paul, we learn that this man of encouragement had made an indelible mark on Paul. Encouragement makes a difference. And so when we look at 1 Corinthians chapter 14, and we see Paul speaking of prophecy as being the greatest of the gifts, of prophecy being what everyone is supposed to aspire to, we can't help but forget that Paul had a mentor whose very name was the son of prophecy. And when you go to 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and Paul speaks of Barnabas as the brother who's become famous for his service in the gospel in all the churches, we remember that, first of all, that Barnabas continued on in his ministry, and he continued to be famous, and he continued to build people up, but also Paul respects him, and he respects his ministry. And then there's Galatians chapter 2, when Paul says the famous phrase, I wish that those Judaizers would just emasculate themselves. Those are the very people who had deceived Barnabas in the first place. And it's affected Paul in such a way that he desires that that would never happen again to anyone else, that no one else would have to go through the same difficulties that Barnabas did. And the most famous is when Paul says, though I speak in the tongues of men and angels, if I have not love, I'm nothing. I'm a clanging gong. If I speak in prophecy, and if I can fathom the mysteries, and if I have faith that can move mountains, if I have not love, it means nothing. Love always perseveres. It always trusts. It never gives up on its word. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Love is patient. Love is kind. And when Paul says, when I was a child, I reasoned like a child, but having become a mature man, I've left those ways behind me, and these three remain: faith and hope and love. We can't help but remember Barnabas, Paul's friend and mentor, who did every one of those things. Barnabas protected Mark. Barnabas kept no record of wrongs. Barnabas prophesied the word of God in love, and he was a blessing everywhere he went. And as I researched and studied Barnabas, all I could think was, if only I could become someone like this. If only I could become someone who sees in the people around me what no one else is willing to see. If I could become someone who sees the potential of God and the love of the Father in the people around me. If only I could become someone who protects those that I love, even when I'm battered. If I could become someone who safeguards and preserves the dignity of those who have fallen. And so, as I read, there was one conclusion possible. Only one takeaway, one application that I could think of, and that is, as Christians, let's be people who speak the words of God. Let's become sons and daughters of encouragement. Let's be people who make a difference in those around us.